Hello, everybody. It's not easy following Nigel Farage, but here goes. So for people who don't know me, I'm Nick Buckley. I was cancelled in 2020. If you can remember May 2020, the height of Black Lives Matter, there was a protest in London where 27 police officers were injured at the peaceful protest. And I thought to myself, who are Black Lives Matter? I'd heard of it, but I didn't know anything about it. So I Googled Black Lives Matter, went on their website, their official website, and read what was there and went, I don't like the sound of any of this. And the bit that stuck out for me was disrupts the Western nuclear family. And I've just spent 20 years working with young people across Greater Manchester, stop them getting involved in crime and antisocial behaviour. And believe me when I say the number one problem we have in our society is a lack of fathers in the home. And disrupt the Western nuclear family really is a call to get rid of more fathers out of the home. And that's when I said, no, I'm not having this. So I wrote a 600-word blog on my personal blog site, posted it, and the first couple of weeks, fine. Some people contact me going, that was interesting. I don't agree with it for these reasons, or people said, oh, I like that, I do agree with it, but I'm not going to put that on your blog because I just want to be anonymous with this. And I thought, that's a bit strange. And then 2 weeks later, someone copied the link off my blog and put it on Twitter. It went mental overnight. At that point, I was chief exec of a charity I founded in Greater Manchester. I appointed a board of trustees, which you have to do when you set up a charity. 450 people online set up a petition, well, 400 people signed a petition to have me fired from the charity I set up. And this was during COVID, so there was no face-to-face meetings, and the board of my charity panicked. Four people, 3 of them had classes, long-term friends, and they fired me over email. I got a 1-sentence email going, Nick, you're dismissed immediately. No face-to-face meetings, no discussions, as simple as that. My life fell apart for that next week. What am I going to do? My life's over. I'm now known as Nick the Nazi. I'm obviously a racist. People are calling me a racist. 6 months before, I'd just been awarded an MBE off our late Queen. So I'd gone from an MBE to a Nazi in 6 months. That's a hell of a fall. And then several things happened, but at the end of the week, I decided, I'm not having this. They've just ruined my life. And I can't get my charity back, but I might be able to save some of my reputation, so the next stage in my journey, in my life, might be a bit easier. So I gave myself the talking to that I've given 10,000 young people. And the conversation basically was, get up, brush yourself down, you're not a victim, stop complaining, don't be a mad ass. You live in a great country, there's opportunities out there. Put your best foot forward and do something. And I decided, well, I'm going to take on the board. So for a living, I strategize. I write projects and to tackle the most complicated social issues we have on our streets. So I got a pen and paper and I started working out what I can do and what I can't do. No point tackling things you can't do. Tackle the things you think you can have an impact on. And then 2 things happened then that basically saved me. I got a physical knock on the door. And I opened the door and some guy said to me, hi, I'm a reporter from the Mail on Sunday. And my first reaction was, oh, crap. What? I wasn't expecting this. What do I? So I thought about it for like literally 30 seconds and said, come in, have a brew. And they did a full piece on me in the Mail on Sunday about how unfair it was. And from that, I got thousands of messages across the world saying, we agree with you, it is a Marxist organisation, don't let this... I had one guy offering to pay my wages, but I didn't need that support. And the second piece of luck I got was, I looked on Twitter and thought, I need some advice. And the only person I knew who'd been cancelled at that point was Darren Grimes. And I didn't know Darren Grimes. So luckily he followed me, or I followed him on Twitter. And that's it. I searched the website out and I emailed him through his website. And he emailed me, which was nice of him, saying, there's not much advice I can give because my fight was with the Electoral Commission. You need to speak to Toby Young at the Free Speech Union. And I went, I remember that on the news a couple of months ago. That I'd heard of Toby Young, I didn't know the man. And I thought, I remember that being on the news. So I Googled that and emailed the Free Speech Union. and Toby Young phoned me up the same day. We had a chat on the phone, and that's when the Free Speech Union got involved. The Free Speech Union then got me some legal representation. I had a few grand in the bank, but I'm thinking, I'm going to need that to live on, because there's no quick job for me. I can't afford to spend that on the solicitors. I don't know what to do. Luckily, they got me a pro bono solicitor involved. They looked at my case, they looked at my contract, and the solicitor said to me, "Who wrote this contract?" And I went, "Well, I wrote my own employment contract to save the charity money." And he went, "Your incompetence is paid off." And that's my claim to fame. My incompetence finally paid off. And he went, "There's no get-out clause in your contract. They can never sack you unless you don't do your job. And you didn't not do your job, they can't sack you." So we wrote to the Board of Trustees. Like I said, these were 3 personal friends. And this is where it gets sad again. 3 personal friends who knew I wasn't racist, who just succumbed to cowardice because they saw what was going online and went, this mob might come for me. And I would rather give him Nick's head than them have my head. So they sacrificed me on the altar of the woke. So me and the solicitor wrote to the Board of Trustees, and we basically said, Nick Buckley's going to sue you individually and personally. And he's going to come after your houses. That's what he wants, your houses. Unless, we'll leave a little crack in the door here for you to walk through, unless all 4 of yous at the same time resign in disgrace. Within 18 hours of them getting that email, they all resigned in disgrace. The lesson to my story really is, now I don't want to sound flippant on this or as if it was easy. I went through hell. It took 5 weeks. It was hell. But the lesson from my story is to beat them was so much easier than you possibly could imagine. They weren't bought into this ideology. The most people online, they all disappeared once I started fighting back. Somebody else set a petition up online to have me reinstated. It got 18,000 signatures compared to the 450 to have me fired. I get no abuse now online. I never did from when I started fighting back because they're cowards. It's easy to bully in a group. And once they realise your group is bigger than their group, they go, "Oh, I'm not in for this. There's someone weaker around the corner. I'm going to start on them." And they were easy to beat. And that's what we need to remember. This is a fad. Just because we're in the middle of this fight, sometimes it seems unwinnable. And we've had these discussions today. How are we going to beat this? But in the history of England, this will be seen as a hiccup. That's all this will ever be seen as a hiccup. It doesn't feel like this at the time. All we need to do is our bit and fight back and say what we need to say. And some of you are saying to yourselves, "That's great, Nick, but I work for this multi-corporate. I'll lose my job." Well, yes, and we don't want you losing your job over an EDI training course because you're just then another martyr. And you being a martyr scares another 50 people, so they won't say anything. We need to be clever. And I've come up with a phrase called be a ninja, not a whinger. It's easy to moan. It's easy to say there's nothing we can do. They're too strong. There's no point. What can I do as one individual? And the answer is you can do a tiny bit. A tiny, tiny, tiny bit. And if the other 60 million people in the country did a tiny, 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 tiny bit, it adds up to a tsunami of change. So I'm sick of the defeatism. I'm sick of people saying nothing can be done. I'm sick of us looking at government to change this for us because they won't, because they're mostly incompetent. We can change this, but only if we as individuals start doing our bit. And that's the lesson I learned from it. Let me pass you over to the Free Speech Union.
Well, I'm the Director of Case Operations at the Free Speech Union, and I hear stories like the story Nick has just told you every single day of the working week and indeed at the weekends. In the 3 years that the Free Speech Union has been running, we have got to the scale where we require 7 full-time members of staff just working in our case and legal teams. We have about 12 new requests for assistance every week. And in that 3 years, we have dealt with 2,000 250 cases of somebody being penalised or punished or sacked or expelled from their university for exercising their right to freedom of expression. So the bad news is that the scale of this problem is absolutely vast. The stories that dominate the headlines are the cases like that of Nigel Farage and Coots, debanking, Kathleen Stock, the ongoing endless monstering of J.K. Rowling. These stories all absolutely deserve the press attention that they get, but that really is just the tip of the point of the iceberg. Beneath that, there is a vast problem which I'm afraid to tell you all is worse than people generally think. That's the bad news. The good news that of those 2,250 cases, the Free Speech Union has achieved a favourable outcome, like the outcome Nick has just described, 73% of the time. So we are winning this war, but it requires a lot of small, tactical victories. It requires me to spend more time than I would ever have wished reading equality, diversity and inclusion statements written by NHS Foundation trusts. But we are, to mix metaphors, beginning to turn the tide. In the moment I have left, I just want to talk about as many cases as you would wish to hear about, but primarily I want to talk about the case of a man called Kelvin Wright, Colonel Kelvin Wright, who was a reservist in the army, an army doctor. He'd served for 14 years, in addition to working as a consultant in intensive care in the NHS. He posted on Facebook, I bet you can guess about which topic, that men cannot be women. A subordinate officer took this to the army hierarchy, to Colonel Wright's commanding officer, and an investigation was launched. Colonel Wright, who I should say at this point has served 2 terms in Afghanistan, one of them in which he was flying on helicopters going to rescue patrols that had been ambushed by the Taliban, helicopters that were, of course, priority targets, work of the most hair-raising and, frankly, terrifying kind that a civilian like myself could possibly begin to imagine. Despite this service, he was investigated, and he faced what the army calls major administrative action, which is as serious as it sounds, and carries penalties including loss of seniority or even demotion. He resigned almost immediately as a matter of honour. He felt that he could not continue in an army that would investigate him after his years of service for such a trivial expression of beliefs that the vast majority of the public that the army exists to defend would agree with. And he came to the Free Speech Union, and we assisted him, we provided him with legal advice, and he decided that he wanted to take the story to the press. Now, the vast majority of our 2,000 plus cases are never in the public domain, but in this instance, he felt that because he was a reservist, it was not his primary form of income, he still had his NHS career, he was in a position where he could make a stand for younger officers, younger enlisted personnel, who would share his views and would feel discriminated against by the Army and indeed by the Air Force and the Royal Navy. We've had cases across the military, I'm afraid to say. So we made the whole affair public, at which point the then Secretary of Defence, Ben Wallace, said that the story was nothing to do, the investigation was nothing to do with Dr. Wright's beliefs. Now, we knew that to be inaccurate because I had all of the documentation in front of me on my computer while I was seeing the Secretary of Defence taking to Twitter to say that this was nothing to do with Dr. Wright's beliefs or his expression of them. So there was a public spat over that and follow-up reporting in the Mail and the Telegraph. But at the end of this process, I want to answer the question I took on cancel culture and won. Well, how did we win? In this case, because public sympathy was so overwhelmingly on the side of this war hero who'd expressed a view that most people would share in entirely reasonable and fair and proportionate terms, it was so embarrassing that the army, bureaucracy, the Ministry of Defence, the Conservative Party, the government, really there was only one possible outcome. He had to be cleared and he was exonerated. Rightly so. Of course, none of that should have happened. The Free Speech Union shouldn't have to exist. We shouldn't be having to engage in these kinds of struggles. But nonetheless, from the top of society to the bottom, from celebrities all the way down to cleaners or care assistants working in care homes. At every level of society, people are facing battles like the one that Nick has described, like the one that Colonel Wright faced. And so if there are 2 points I can put to you that you take away, firstly, the problem is much more widespread, but secondly, it is possible to win.